Hi, my name is Karen Holmes. I'm the founder and director of the World Peace Organization for the One World Government. You've heard in the news over and over again about the big lie, and that's what I wanted to talk about today. My government proposal, the exit strategy for Iraq, that is my area of focus. There was a grand lie, a big lie that was told to justify the Iraq war. And so instead of talking so much now about Donald Trump and the grand lie, and because it's happening right now, I'd like to just go back and compare what happened in Iraq, and then you can look at what's happening now and kind of unravel the illusion that is based on it. When somebody tells the grand lie, the truth doesn't overcome the lie. It just reaches the point where nobody knows who to trust. So when you look into Congress, people will be saying things, and the lack of trust is just all over the place. Nobody knows who to trust. If the insurgents, for example, were told the big lie, and they were looking at it from the perspective of the President of the United States telling them that there was a problem and that he needed basically their help to solve this problem, and they went to Washington, D.C. on January 6th, and they thought what they were doing was legal, that they were doing something that the President of the United States told them to do. And at that point in time, they thought they were justified. They were taking pictures of themselves with their cell phone cameras and proudly telling people what they were doing. And then the FBI was just kind of gathering up all this information and then sending them off to jail. So it was like, what happened? How can I defend myself from this whole idea? It didn't make sense. And it was because of the grand lie creates an illusion. It's a sense, and the truth doesn't overcome the lie. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unravel the idea of the grand lie today and explain to you how it works and why it doesn't work. Okay, there are two power games. There's 7 power games that people play. They're called the 7 deadly sins. And the reason they're called deadly sins is because people die when that happens, when they play them, and also they're sins because the Spanish word for sin, the Spanish word sin, S-I-N, comes from a sense of lacking something. Okay, so when you're looking at that, it's a compensation. It's something that people do to compensate for something. It's a compensatory game, power game. It's a grab for power. Rather than coming from where true power comes from, it's a grab for power. Okay, so there's 7 games that people play called the 7 deadly sins. The Catholic Church is supposed to be, and I'm not going to judge them for it, but they're supposed to be teaching that idea of the 7 deadly sins. But over the years, the misunderstandings have crept in, and it's not really something where people are aware of them. In fact, the opposite effect has come out. The 7 deadly sins are let's say, pride, envy, greed, lust, anger, sloth, and gluttony. Okay? People play, so all of these things lead to people's death. Okay, they're called deadly sins because somebody dies with it. The sin of gluttony, let's say, is considered, you think of it as being, well, I'm really fat, I'm so fat, but it's not that at all. The sin of gluttony is actually where you put you feel good, you use something outside of yourself to feel good, like alcohol or drugs, or it has to do also with like bulimia and diabetes and anorexia. Those are all 7 deadly sins, the sin of gluttony. And it has to do with the idea of using something outside of yourself to feel better. Compassion. You get compassion by doing that. The only problem with it is that it doesn't work. It doesn't get you compassion, because that's not where true compassion comes from. Okay, you cannot eat ice cream or drink a glass of wine, a bottle of wine, a keg of wine to make yourself feel better. It might work for a little while, but then basically it stops, and then you're relying on something that doesn't work, and then basically it's like you're 180 degrees from where you think you are, and that's when people die. Okay, so I'll go into that in greater depth later. In fact, I have a chart in one of my books called the Outline Series on Creativity that explains how to recognize the 7 deadly sins in your life. They come from 3 fears: loss, death, and failure. I'm not going to go into that. My books explain that in much better detail. They're channeled messages, and they're explain all of these things in much greater and better detail than I can do. But what I wanted to do is talk about the big lie, the grand lie. Now, there's governments generally play 5 of the games. Gluttony and sloth, those are more individual games that people play, where their sloth was very popular. You can say people focused on sloth years ago, like in the 1980s, when people would work really, really hard. It's the opposite idea. They would work really, really hard, like 80 hours a week at their job, to prove how good they were and how talented they were, and then they just burned themselves out. And so that's what happens, is you get to the point where you just can't work hard enough. It's all like a misunderstanding that starts us out. Now, the governments, on the other hand, play 5 of the games, and that's why what we have is, like I said before in previous, these 5 games are basically compensate for lack of power. So people play, it's the games associated with revenge. So you can see, like I said, if you have a lack of power and you're going to get revenge on somebody, it's like somebody has power over you, so you're trying to grab for power. The 5 games of revenge, 3 of them are just power games, power grabs. 2 of them are based on weaving illusion, on the grand lie. One of them is the sin of lust, and that doesn't have to do necessarily with sexuality, like wanting it all the time. And the other one is envy. And that is, so these are the 2 games. These other games, pride leads to war, envy leads to genocides, greed leads to massacres, lust leads to slavery and, let's say, human rights violations, but there's also elements of greed and anger in there. And then anger leads to acts of terrorism. So what we're doing is we're seeing, let's say that terrorism comes because you say, I'm not going to listen to you, I'm going to deny you a voice, and then you're glad when people rise up and protest, because then you can put them down. See, there's connections between, so if you're playing the game of lust, basically enslaving people, you do it because you want like a combination of a voice. You raise your voice because you don't feel you have a voice. And greed is the massacres because you don't have something, and therefore you want to take it from somebody. So these ideas, these 5 power games seem to work to grab for power, but they don't, because there's always, you're coming from a sense of lack. And because of that, you're going against universal law, and there's always a backlash. If you are enslaving somebody because you want a voice, a combination between a voice and abundance. That's what greed is a lack of abundance, lack of voice, lack of capacity, a lack of respect, and lack of fear, let's say fear of intimacy. Okay, lack of intimacy. So it's like the game of lust is like a bipolar thing where you're going, I own you, I'm going to hold on to you, I'm going to push you away. I'm going to hold, it's like a bipolar thing. I'm jealous, so I'm going to hold on to you, but then you're hurting me, so I'm going to push you away. It's like fear of loss. It's one of the fears of loss. So you fear it, so then you end up being alone. Now, because you keep reinstating the idea that you're alone, it's like this, always like this flip-flop idea. There's always like this misunderstanding, always like this idea that you're coming from too much power or not enough power, rather than understanding where true power comes from. For example, you look at Donald Trump. I'm going to just hold on to that for just a minute so you can understand that. You look at Donald Trump, he's been accused of sexual assault. Okay, he fears intimacy. So basically what he does, now think about that. He wants a combination between a voice and abundance. So he goes out and does rallies all the time. He's bringing his people in. He wants support. He wants their financial support. He's doing it because he wants abundance. He promotes his golf clubs. He promotes all these ideas. He's promoting ideas as president of the United States, the most powerful man on the planet, basically. And he wants more power because his idea of power is abundance and a voice. For years, he didn't have a voice, so he did, let's say, cameos on movies and things like that, always in the spotlight, always wanting to be in the spotlight, always wanting money, always wanting the spotlight. So then what happens is this. That's how you can kind of tell how the games work. So you have to understand how the games work. I told you I would talk about Iraq now. Okay, so the Iraq War is what created the schism in the world. It divided people up into four different parts, four different segments. Okay, so it started with the Gulf War. Now, some of you are probably not even old enough to remember this stuff, and that's okay. All you have to know is how this works. Okay, so the game of pride is the game that you lack respect. So basically, if somebody comes to you, let's say you're a proud person, somebody comes to you and says, I don't respect you for what you just did. I used to respect you a lot, but now I don't respect you because I've seen what you've done. All of a sudden people are going, oh, I don't like that. It's you wage war on that person. That person wages war. So that's what it is. It's like, you don't respect me, I'm going to wage war on you. That's what happened. You're not loyal to me. Elected officials are supposed to be loyal to the Constitution, not to the person. This is not the cult, an identity cult. This is not something where one person you don't respect. You're not supposed to be loyal to one person. You're supposed to be loyal to the Constitution. And the Constitution basically why? Because that's where you get your power from as an elected official. You don't get your power from Donald Trump, because what he's doing is he's trying to control people. He's playing the game of lust, where he says, you're loyal to me, or I am going to push you away. I'm going to hold on to you, or I'm going to push you away. It's that idea. It's like, if you're not always loyal to me, I'm going to run you out of office, and we're going to primary you in the next election. That doesn't work. That's not where true power comes from, when you're going to just get rid of somebody because they weren't loyal to you. In fact, if your attorney is not loyal to you and not doing what you want them to do, you have a fixer. Your attorney should be telling you not to do that. Your attorney should be saying, that's not right. You shouldn't be doing that. It's not legal. So don't do that. Instead, Donald Trump said, you do this, otherwise I'm going to fire you. You're fired. Okay? So now, let's look at the game of envy. So if George Herbert Walker Bush said to Saddam Hussein, you're not loyal to me. He said, you're not loyal to me. I helped you, and you're not loyal to me. Why would Saddam Hussein have to be loyal to George Herbert Walker Bush? If he's president of Iraq, why would he have to be loyal to another country? He's the president of a sovereign country. It's like a win-win agreement, okay? It's like we're both equals here, and I'm looking out for my country, and I know you're looking out for your country, and we have to come up with some sort of an agreement here for us to get along, okay? If you want my oil, don't blame me. Let's make an agreement about this. You don't have to destroy me because of this. If I'm defending my oil, leave me alone, okay? All right, so that's what happened that with a war, the Gulf War. And if you look into it, you'll see that the Gulf War was based on Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was trying to defend his oil, the third largest oil reserves in the world, trying to defend his oil reserves from the Kuwaitis who were trying to slant drill into Iraq's oil fields. Okay, so George Herbert Walker Bush waged war on him and prevented him from doing it. That's why those oil wells, if you don't remember, you can look it up. The oil wells were set on fire. A whole big long line of oil wells were set on fire. But what happened then is the Clintons got into office. Bill Clinton got into office, and then George W. Bush got into office, and he went in with the idea of saying, this man is evil. He judged Saddam Hussein, and that is what happened, is a sense of judgment was there. That's what, so this leads to slavery, this leads to genocide. So by the sense of judgment that was put on Saddam Hussein, that was like I said, these two games are based on weaving an illusion. And so Donald Trump told the big lie, but George Bush told the big lie also, the grand lie, to justify the preemptive strike on Iraq. By judging him, he got over an 80% approval rating for the war, and basically there were no weapons of mass destruction that had ever been found. Hans Blix, the UN weapons inspector, as they were invading, had said there were no weapons, that Saddam Hussein had actually complied with the UN sanctions to not have any weapons. He had already destroyed his weapons, but hey, that doesn't really matter, does it? That just makes it easier to go in and punish him, take over. We're going to win easier because he had already destroyed the weapons of mass destruction. Okay, so you see what I mean? It's like this is the game of envy. Now the game envy comes about because of lack of capacity. George Bush was known as a man who didn't basically, he was not somebody who had ever achieved a great deal in his life. He was the head of he had bought a football team, his was it football or baseball? I don't remember. He had bought a major league team. He had been the governor, but he had never really achieved what he thought was really good. But when he became president, his dad helped him. That was the whole structure that was there for him. Now, what happened was, when you lack capacity, this is all about capacity. It's like you're grabbing for capacity. He said, I'm a war president. And he was very proud of the fact that he was a war president. But what he wanted was a combination of respect and abundance. Okay? So that's what it was he thought by getting revenge on Saddam Hussein, this is where the revenge is. And if you notice, that's what the shape of why our national defense buildings are a Pentagon. And then, but nobody's in agreement. There isn't anybody here who's in agreement, was in agreement for him to wage war on a sovereign country, to get a matter of respect and abundance. Let's say, control of the natural resources and respect for being a war president. He was comparing himself to his father and basically using the idea of regime change that had been a power game by our government. The Pentagon is the national defense building shaped like that because of revenge, the 5 power games of revenge. Okay, so now how do you overcome the grand lie? If the truth doesn't overcome the grand lie, what does overcome the grand lie? And what's interesting is when George Bush invaded Iraq with a preemptive strike, imagine that someone in our legal system, someone is presumed innocent until proven guilty. In other words, the burden of proof is on the accuser, not on the defender. You cannot defend yourself from prejudice and ulterior motives. Somebody has to come in and defend you. So, in other words, you can't, when somebody lies about you, like a character defamation campaign, you can't defend yourself. People have to go to court to defend themselves, and then the judge and the attorneys basically have to work it out. What is character defamation? It's an individual form of genocide because it's based on this idea of capacity. Now, when you are doing that, let's say that when George W. Bush invaded Iraq, his approval rating at that point in time was over 80%. Donald Trump never got above 50%. He never got like above 48% approval rating because, but George Bush had an over 80% approval rating. The question is, what happened to that other 20%? What happened to that other 20%? The other 20% was because they understood about universal law, maybe. Okay, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That is the whole idea. That unravels this whole idea of illusion. Okay, the idea of revenge. In the Bible it says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. So the grand lie, what unravels this idea of the illusion is these 7 principles, because universal law is based on these 7 principles. It creates a sense of balance again. Now, the principles are equality. Let's say this. For conflict resolution, the first requirement is that everybody has to be considered equal. Okay, with a kangaroo court, where one side can accuse another side and that other person can't defend himself or herself. That's why there were so many lynchings a long time ago. Black people were lynched because of that. Okay, so in other words, for a stable society where everybody has to be considered equal under the law. For a fair trial, everybody has to be considered equal under the law. Now, that doesn't mean that police policies or how they respond to things, they maybe need to come up with better ideas on how to stop people. But it's like, so that is another question. But so liberty is your unalienable rights. People who have been dragged into a war lack equality. People who've been dragged into a genocide lack their rights. People who have been dragged into a massacre lack their freedom. People who lack compassion, remember I told you about compassion and the sin of gluttony, they lack their feel like they've been victimized, and the slavery, okay? Then basically then poverty, they lack abundance, that's coming from a sense of lack. All of these things are greed. So let's say this. Let's say that for greed you have the balance of wealth, the wealth equality, income equality. So let's say that it's shifted to where all the wealth is within the top 2%, the top 1% of the people own equal or more than the rest of the 99%. That is why are they're grabbing so much? It's a sense of you can't get ahead. You can't create the American dream. Okay, so now that's what I'm talking about with all these ideas. With abundance and poverty, okay, it's because things keep shifting one direction. There's no need for poverty. Now, I'm not talking about socialism either. I'm talking about people being able to create the life they want. And there are ways to do that with, let's say people are going on YouTube and they're going on creating their own websites and their own channels where they're making a lot of money because of this. So what I'm saying is that those things give people the opportunity to function on a higher level. And not only that, but let's say, have you ever stopped to consider, I like to collect recipes, so I go on these channels, and this woman, this very impoverished woman from Arkansas is coming up with these recipes, hometown recipes, and she's got 1 million supporters. People subscribe to her. So it's kind of like, do they like the casseroles, or do they just support her because they think that she needs to have some help? Okay, and that allows her to come out of her poverty. I like that idea. I like a way for people to rise out of poverty because everybody's willing to do something that's really kind of easy to do, isn't it? And plus you get the casserole recipes. Right. So anyway, what happens then is you have, the next one is famine and capacity. When people are not functioning from their capacity, that's the first requirement for the global renaissance, is everybody has to function from their own capacity. So if there's a famine, it's because what happens if nobody's farming anymore and everybody's gone into town? And they're trying to get a job at the mill that's just shut down, and there's no farms, and there's no, that's kind of something that's been going on too. What happens if you take somebody who can control the corporations, and we're going to just get rid of this corporation, and all of a sudden, this land that's been set aside for this agricultural corporation is basically not being farmed anymore. So it's like you can control things. It's much harder to control things when you have lots of smaller farmers and they're all doing something with the land that is much more, and that's kind of something that we're going to be working on in the future. The pendulum is going to swing back. The final thing is having people have a voice. So these principles create a sense of balance again. I was talking to somebody earlier this morning about this thing. Okay, so let's say that you have somebody who's very, very oppressive, weaving an illusion, doing all these things. And I was thinking about the story of Mulan. Okay, so the people there, the prayer wheel, the Buddhist prayer wheel goes around in circles just like this. So the people are looking at all these principles, thinking about it over and over again, and they spin their prayer wheel, and it goes around, and they're putting attention into it, and that's what it is. It's a symbol of balance. It's a symbol of balance. So you look at this idea and you have a sense of balance in your life. And life is good as long as you keep putting energy into it and as long as you're standing on these 7 principles. Okay, when you have somebody like the Mongols coming across, and they built this, the Chinese built the big wall and the Mongols come over the top of it. And they're going to interfere in the lives of the people. They're going to take land, they're going to control it. Okay, they've built up their armies, they're going to come in. So basically there's a sense of oppression, and it's all of these ripples are coming about. These 7 principles create the sense of balance again and help them to understand equality. So the people who are putting all this pressure in, this oppression, are coming when you are standing on the principles of true power and these balance, then you rise in power, and the people who are grabbing for power, who lack power, are coming down in power. And that's where the equality comes from. That's how you end oppression and intolerance, is you create a sense of equality in the world. You allow, let's say, you allow the people who are grabbing for power to lose power, and you are rising in power by doing what's in everyone's best interest. It's in everyone's best interest, you can say, to create a sense of resistance, but you're not going to go and wipe them out, the Mongolians, because they have families too, and they have their children, and they have their land. There needs to be a sense of equality. And that happens when you rise in power because of you're standing on the principles of true power. And where does true power come from? It comes from assuming responsibility. Now, so let's watch in the U.S. government now. Last night, Joe Biden gave his first speech to the joint members of Congress. And we had the Republicans who are grabbing for power, and they're weaving an illusion, and their grand lie has been told, and they're weaving this illusion, and they're trying to control the voters. They're trying to keep those 74 million Trump supporters. But I'll give you an idea. By the end, Trump will never. I prophesied, basically based on this information that I have, that Trump would never go up above a 50% approval rating. Now, how many presidents can you say that about? No president has ever stayed below 48%. And the reason for that is because the only people that he could convince were the people who basically were the people who functioned for their own interests, and let's say the Republicans, the people who were grabbing for power. Okay, when the Democrats stand on the principles, it makes the Republicans very, very nervous because they're not standing on the principles of true power. They're grabbing for power. So let's say that you have certain members of the society. The preemptive strike on Iraq separated everybody into 4 segments. Donald Trump could only function with the Republicans and the people who function for their own interests. He couldn't bring in the people whose lives were affected, and he couldn't bring in the people who stood on the principles. Okay, so now what's going to happen is, for the next election, he's only going to be able to, he's losing the Republicans because they're going to be out. The next, if he's able to walk away from the legal problems that he's in, he's only going to have a 25% approval rating. Those people, even if he gets charged with a bunch of crimes, they're going to try and appeal it or do something. He's only going to get a 25% approval rating. He's part of the group of people who function for their own interests. And that's where the world peace marketing strategy comes in. Everybody, each of the people, every person on the planet fits into one of four categories right now. And that is the people either who stand on the principles, and when they do, it threatens the security and support of somebody else. And basically that those people have to be responsible for their own financial support. So basically those people, the Republicans, basically have to be responsible for their own financial support. It's like a husband who stands on the principles. The wife is a trophy wife, and she's getting older, and she's afraid that she's going to be wiped out. She's going to be divorced and out of the family. And then the children, as the third group, their lives are affected. And then the fourth group are the extended family and the neighbors, who basically function for their own interests. So Donald Trump, you can tell by the games which group of people each of these people function in. But each of the groups are also segmenting too. You have the people who stand on the principles, but they don't necessarily, they're grabbing for power based on principles. So each of the, let's say the Democratic Party is separating, the Republican Party is separating, segmenting to the people who function because their lives are affected, they're segmenting. And it comes down to the individual level. That's where you could say, I personally have reached the point now where I am functioning. I stood on the principles. I got slammed by the people who are functioning. People's lives have been affected. Then the people who function for their own interests have been doing a character defamation campaign. And now, because I was one of the first people to stand on the principles back in 2003, it was when I had my first when I first started to introduce this on the government level and such, put it online. Actually, I've been online since 2001. But now I'm coming down to the individual level, and now it's time for me on a personal level to work to create my own life. I've been sending out information, I've been doing all these things, and now it's time for me to step back inside of myself and to work on my own life and to create that. Okay, so that doesn't mean I'm going to change anything, but I know that this character defamation campaign against me and Saddam Hussein has reached the point where we are now going to take all this information, and we had to get it out, and now it's time for me to step back and to create my own life based on this idea. Okay, so as the organization, my organization has separated out, everybody is going to be at this place pretty soon. I'm going to be sharing more information online, and I'm still going to be doing things, but I have my books, I have my business, and I have my organization, and it's just down to the point where it's like, now it's time for me to pay some attention to myself. So that's it. You're not going to notice a lot of difference because I'm still the head of the organization, and I still have my business, and I have to just take my books and apply them in my own life too, and then I have to make my ascension. I'm going back into making my ascension, focusing on my own ascension and my own spiritual growth, which I've missed for a long time because I was a material person. Then I had a job. I started a prayer circle. Then I started with the spiritual stuff, and I set aside my job and my career, and then I focused full-time on my spirituality, made my ascension back in 2000, and then I came back to deal with all my fears and everything, and then I had to start applying this information, become a nonprofit organization, and so my career then became nonprofit and starting a business, and now it's time for me to go back and find a sense of balance again in my life, to combine everything and to create a sense of balance. And this is what everybody is going to be doing too. When the jobs aren't there anymore, You have to start to understand all of these ideas. You can join the organization as an affiliate member and support the idea. We're going to be doing a constitutional amendment idea. But we all have to also make our ascension from, let's say, the third dimension to where we're fighting, where we're playing the power games, and the games stop working, to the point where we understand that we can get our life, but not by playing the games. And then we have to sit down and we have to actually work to create the life we want. And that's where I am right now. Okay? So I just wanted to share this with you today, that the grand lie, the big lie, really is not anything you can understand by looking at all of these principles, that revenge doesn't work, that you still, if you are a Republican and you're getting revenge on the Bidens and the Obamas and the Clintons, that's not going to get you reelected. Who cares about them? Leave them alone. They're living their lives. Then what happens is, sometime, if you're relying on somebody else and getting revenge, at some point in time, you have to stop getting revenge. If you're relying on alcohol or drugs, at some time you have to stop. You have to stop being an alcoholic, and you have to go on blaming people for lack of capacity. I want you to feel compassion for me because my life has been torn apart. Okay, why would I feel compassion for you? You've made your own choices. So basically, you can't get compassion by demanding it from other people. Okay, so it doesn't work. The games don't work. So what you have to do then at some point in time is you have to stop playing the games of alcoholism or drug abuse or revenge, and you have to start creating your own life. Okay, so now it's time for me to do that too. I didn't have to defend myself anymore through character defamation. I can just go on and create my life because nobody can actually stop me from doing it. Okay, that's where you will be too, all the time. Okay, so I ask you to like, share, and subscribe, and most of all, share with other people, because tell them about this, because this information is really important for everybody. If people are worried about the grand lie or they don't understand it, compare this time period to what happened in Iraq. After Iraq, for a while, our economy, our government was paying $1 billion a week during the height of the war. $1 billion a week coming out of our economy. We don't have to do that kind of thing. We can just function on a higher level. Our government has to give up the games. We have to stop the games of revenge and regime change and putting up a big show of force. We can just support the plan for the international government and turn the disputes between nations over to the JAG officers, the military attorneys. Okay, let them handle that. Let the State Department handle all this stuff. Okay, so like, share, and subscribe, but most of all, share. Thank you.